Still talking about leaders versus the next generation. I want to kind of shift focus just a little bit, and talk more about how we as leaders should best treat the next generation. Like we spoke about, Trump and DeSantis clashing against each other. We spoke about Memorial Day, how they're just losing sight. And so we're doing something wrong because we're just not attracting them. But how do we best treat the next generation? And I'm going to go to a very, very, very unlikely source, and that is Bert Kreischer. Dr. Rod, I just got to ask you, before this, had you ever heard of Bert Kreischer?
Short answer, no.
Okay, great. So I introduced you to someone new. Now, I have to say, normally with all these things that we share, there's usually some pretty good role models that we'll talk about. I'm not promoting Bert Kreischer as a great leadership role model. There's a lot of things he does that I do not necessarily agree with. However, actually, it's interesting. Through this podcast, you will gather my, or our viewing habits. And yes, one of my guilty pleasures is to watch comedy podcasts. It's just like sometimes when I'm working on some mindless things, I'll have podcasts playing in the background that I don't really need to pay attention to, that I can laugh at every now and then. Or sometimes I just want a bit of an emotional escape, and so I'll jump into some comedy podcasts. And one of those is Bert Kreischer, or actually Two Bears, One Cave. Two Bears, One Cave, which is normally Bert Kreischer and Tom Segura, two really great comedians. Now, Bert is known as The Machine, and actually just this weekend, his movie just launched across the States. And unfortunately, I can't see it here in the Dominican Republic. It's not available. He shot to stardom many years ago through one of his acts, or the stories in his acts. It's actually a true story of when he was going through college. He went on a trip to Russia with his class, ended up hooking up with the Russian mafia, and ended up robbing all his friends on the train. And it's kind of like that routine made him famous, right? It was a pretty funny story, and he's a funny guy. Hold the language, though. Hold the language. But Bert, on this podcast, and so actually, a bit of a PSA, a bit of I suppose an appeal. If you want some different movies to watch rather than just all these, obviously these Disney woke agendas or just these massive franchises, that's all movies seem to be nowadays, is just a big franchise pulling out their 20th episode of the movie. Now, if you're wanting some variety and want to bring back some of those, the traditional, some of those great comedy movies that we used to love to watch and laugh at, let me encourage you, support this movie. Go and watch it at the movies and show people that we actually value some good old comedy movies. Yeah, The Machine. It's in movies now. Go and check it out. Find it out. So it's his story, but it carries on of what his life is like now, and he gets gets kidnapped by the mob now and everything like that. So go and check it out. So Bert has actually was on his podcast, Two Bears, One Cave, with Kevin Smith, who's actually Silent Bob from Jay and Silent Bob. I don't know if you know those movies, but like I said, I wouldn't recommend. Look, all of our links to everything we refer to is all in the description. However, warning, bad language and everything like that. However, at this point in the podcast, it was actually quite interesting when they were sharing the talking about during the pandemic and their responsibility as leaders to the next generation. And Bert they're kind of sharing the fact that they actually, I love their honesty. They were sharing about their mental health challenges that, Kevin Smith, had a mental breakdown and went into rehab and all that sort of stuff. And he kind of shares that story, and Bert's very big on his, battles with mental health as well. So it's really good that they're open about this. But Kevin Smith here is actually talking about him going through knowing he was about to have a breakdown, but couldn't stop because he knew that on his tour that he was going on, he had all of these people that were relying on him for their income. And then Bert echoed that as well. And he said, yeah, look, when we went through the pandemic, Bert Kreischer actually did this tour called the Fully Loaded Tour, where no one was touring. There was no work for comedians anywhere. Obviously, everything was shut down. And Bert did this Fully Loaded Tour, and he just gathered all of his friend comedians and just said, come along, let's just do a tour. I'm going to create work for you, right? And so he talks about that he has this responsibility of like, no, there's all these people that they make their living from me. And he said, it's not like they're like, Bert's my meal ticket. No, like genuine people, like the bus drivers, the truck drivers, the lighting experts, the sound engineers, the everything like that. And he talks about when they were in, when they were on tour, he said he'd have these big, burly, muscular guys come up with like almost tears in their eyes going, thank you. You're actually keeping me working. Like you're helping me pay my rent. You're helping me pay my mortgage because you're doing work. And I think it's really interesting, this approach that most leaders, we kind of forget that, or we kind of think that next generation, they're there for us. These people that are following us, I'm doing this great thing, and these people are helping me do my thing. Where Bert and Kevin Smith actually had this shift of perspective of like, actually, no, we do this thing because we care about the people that rely on us, and that they understood the responsibility of that the followers, they rely on us. And so, Dr. Rod, I think it's interesting, that shift in perspective, that like I've got these people that rely on me and I want to do right by them. I want to keep touring. I want to keep food on their table, because both of these guys had so much money that they didn't need to. They could have just stopped, but they felt this responsibility to the people that they lead, or that next generation. How do we, because you and I both know that especially in ministry, leaders tend to have this idea of, well, I have this great idea, I have this great vision from God, I'm charging towards it, and anyone else is here to help me fulfill my vision. How do we shift that perspective from they're here to help me, shift it back to, well, how can I support them?
Oh, easy. If you're a pastor, go and talk to some kingdom business people, because they do this every day.
Yep.
And they're motivated to do it. Look, quite honestly, it's a wonderful privilege, of course, to be in business and to be able to provide an income for other people, even in a small business, to provide income for a few people. Theologically, of course, it's God who is ultimately our provider. We just need to be careful that we don't run our business down because we feel that we've got a personal responsibility to make sure that these other people have income.
Yes.
But look, that aside, I don't think that's at issue here at all. I think these guys have shown a real heart for the welfare of others. And look, I looked at that YouTube video, and every second or third word, was the old F-bomb, and I thought, well, there'd be a lot of people I wouldn't want to see this particular YouTube clip. But, there's this expression, their heart's in the right place. And look, even people who don't have a particularly Christian outlook on life do engage in business in a way which is highly consistent with the Word of God. One of the primary purposes of business is to provide people with opportunities for employment. We're not all created to be entrepreneurs. We're not all the kinds of people who can develop new ideas and go into new markets and find capital and so on and so forth. And that's just as well, because entrepreneurs as a whole, they're not that good as workers. So,
No,
we
we are
need all
not.
kinds in this world. And listen, I would say too, just in relation to COVID, with all of the lockdowns and so on, honestly, people in the media and the arts, they were savagely hit
Yes.
by the lockdowns, because their opportunities to earn income virtually disappeared altogether.
Yep.
Someone running a small restaurant, for example, they were able to survive by offering a takeaway or takeout service. But for many people, particularly those in the performing arts, their opportunities to earn income dried up altogether.
Yep.
And they became, destitute, really. They just had no way. So what these guys did, I think, is very noble. And I think they should be applauded for it. For those who do have entrepreneurial giftings, even if it is given expression through the arts and entertainment area, think about how important your success is to all of those who actually depend on your success for their sustenance. So I say more power to them, good on them. And of course, many of those people whose incomes were sustained through that tour were of the next generation.
Yes.
And so they were able to see a really good example of humanity at work.
I like that. A good example of humanity. I like that take. And it's interesting when we look at people that are forging a way. Especially people that are entrepreneurial, I kind of like when you talk about the forging in new markets and things like that, creating jobs and stuff. That was one big thing that really struck me when I first moved to the Dominican Republic here. And obviously their welfare system is non-existent. And the classes, there's a massive gap in the classes. There's big, just their minimum wage is like $300 US a month. I think they've just recently put up with minimum wage. That's what a lot of people live on. And part of, as soon as I came here, my heart went out. I'm like, I've got to build my business so I can build offices here. I can employ staff here, so I can try to bring some work and outsourcing. Like I have team in India, but what if I have team here in the Dominican Republic as well that I outsource those services to? And so that's where my mind went to, not because I need to build my business, but I was like, I want to help these people in the best way that I know that we. Okay, we kind of bagged on commerce a little bit earlier, but now's our time to promote commerce and just go, look, by business, that's how economies grow. Through business, that's how communities grow. That's how real support is provided. And so I think that as entrepreneurs, don't have that God complex. That's a really good point that you made, Dr. Rod. Is like, we aren't the provider. Like, I'm not the one that's going to provide them. God's given me the skills and the opportunity to be able to bring some knowledge and experience and be able to expand our business here. But it's God that pays the bills. It's God that's providing. I'm just doing the work. I'm just being obedient to what God's calling me to, and hopefully having that impact along the way. But I think that's really important, Dr. Rudd, as you said, is like we don't have a God complex. But as I find it really interesting that contrast you made between business and ministry. That business leaders, we tend to get this. We tend to understand that we are providing incomes for people, and we're providing living for those people. But why is it that in ministry that we tend to have that? Why have we got it twisted? Why have we got it the other way around?
Well, partly because our education as ministers and pastors doesn't touch on these issues at all. I mean, I think it would be a good thing if every Bible college degree included something on business and human resources management in it. And of course, I spend a lot of my time talking about the whole idea that God has a particular purpose for business in the kingdom, and it really complements what goes on in the church.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier about a pastor. Obviously, the one you had in mind was that archetypical charismatic pastor who gets a wonderful vision and shares that vision, and then has an expectation, which in many cases is quite unreasonable, that people are going to fall into line and support it. Pastors with a vision need to be a little bit entrepreneurial and go and find the people who will support them.
Yes.
So I think it's a bit self-defeating in some ways to stand up in front of your current congregation and say, well, I've got this vision, and now your job is to fall into line behind it and to support it. If you've got a vision as an entrepreneur, you go and find people who can provide the capital.
Yeah.
You go and find people who can make it become a reality. So, for example, who can provide machining or marketing services or whatever. And I think one of the skills we need to develop as pastors is to be able to present our vision to those who will get behind it. And most of the time, there will be a solid core of people who get behind you who come from the business sector. They're the ones who have actually got the financial resources to back you.
Yeah.
And look, there are many, many examples of pastors who have done this. This is not to say you ignore your congregation, but your role as a pastor is equip those in your congregation to fulfill the purpose that God has for them.
Yes.
And I'm sure this is the segue to you mentioning the leadership course, the free leadership program.
What leadership program is that we have, and what can they learn in there, Dr. Rod?
Mate, they can learn an awful lot in that.
Discovering their purpose and understanding that it's important to help those that we're leading fulfill their purposes.
Absolutely, and that's what we need to do as pastors. But when we get that great big vision, that's when we need to be entrepreneurial pastors and go and find people who will support it. And they won't necessarily all be in our own congregation. I know that will be anathema to many, but that's what I believe, and that's the way I try to live.
And also, like, I know it's almost cliche because I bring it up every time we talk about this topic, is Jesus came to serve, not be served. Like,
That's right.
Like you mentioned, we as pastors aren't taught it. Yeah, you were. Jesus taught it, right? Like, and why have we lost? Why have we lost that? Like, it's not like we've got this big vision from God, and now it's time for everyone else to fall in line and serve us and serve me and my vision. No, we're here to serve those, and that goes across business as well, because we as business owners understand the benefit of, or understand the responsibility we have to employ, our team and to be able to keep them employed, and we take on that weight and that responsibility of the ownership of knowing that, well, I've got to pay the wages every week, and it's that weight on us. But do we actually step out even greater and go, okay, how can I support my people? How can I support that next generation even more? How can I support those people that are going to raise up and take on? Maybe they'll take over your position. Maybe they'll take on the business. Maybe they'll expand it into a different area or something like that. But how can we support those people? And that's probably the biggest metaphor or lesson I believe that we can take from the machine, Bert Kreischer, in what he was talking about with his team, is like, he understood the importance of, I've got to go out and do something because I am supporting people. It's my responsibility to grow something because I've got people relying on me. What if we took that attitude towards the people that we're leading? Like, I've got to do this for them. Like, I'm here to serve them and help them fulfill their vision, help them fulfill their purpose, help them fulfill their financial needs and everything like that through what I'm doing. What if we took that responsibility, that it's our responsibility to support our team, not their responsibility to support us? Imagine the shift we could see in our worlds. Hey, you've just watched an excerpt from the On the Cube Leadership podcast. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If it challenged your leadership or inspired you in some way, put a comment below. And if you want to watch the full episode or more content like this, check out our channel. And hey, consider subscribing while you're there.